All right, everyone. Before we get into the fun stuff about color theory, I just want to go over a very quick overview of the color wheel and just some technical terms that will just help you understand the theory behind all of this later. And I know it's going to be sort of dense, but remember, learning this theory is going to help you make better art and know what tools you're working with, which will lead to just a better understanding and make stuff less frustrating down the line. So what I have right now is just a really basic color wheel, and I just wanted to introduce a couple of key terms. Mainly the primary colors, which are yellow, blue, and red. I'm sure you've heard this before. It is discussed in every elementary art class, so this is more a review than anything. And then we also have our secondary colors, which are the green, orange, purple. It is just the mix in between these primary colors, so blue and yellow equals green, yellow and red equals orange, blue and red equals purple. And then all of the ones in between this are your tertiary colors. So blue and green, you get this blue-green. Green and yellow, you get yellow-green. This one here, that's yellow-orange, and then red-orange, red-violet, or red-purple. Usually we refer to purple as violet, and then blue and purple as blue-violet. Now each one of these tertiary colors has their own fancy color. I might call this one indigo, or I might call this one magenta, or this one vermilion. But that's not super important. When we're discussing color theory and the technicalities behind it, we tend to give these tertiary colors compound names just because it makes discussing them easier, and then you don't get into the weeds about what constitutes sap green versus leaf green or something along those lines. So if you start looking through Photoshop or any other digital art program, this color wheel starts to not make the most amount of sense, but that's only because computers work with a different one. And I just want to bring this up not to confuse you, but just to explain some stuff in case it comes up later, because as you're working with things, it most certainly will. So these color wheels here are just very simplified displays of how color mixing works in a couple of different modes. So let's start with the one on the far left. Now this is your typical traditional yellow, blue, red. Now this is called a subtractive version of color. Subtractive and additive is basically what you have to do to get to white, right? So when you're working with physical paints, you're already at white. You can't add color to a canvas and expect to get white unless you're just using white paint, but that's sort of neither here nor there because black and white are not considered colors in the traditional sense. So yellow, blue, and red comes from this long-standing tradition of art where those are your primary colors, and that's how you can get pretty much everything. However, as we've moved into the digital age, this color theory has advanced, but the language surrounding it hasn't exactly caught up with this, which leads to a lot of confusion. So that's where you get stuff like Cmyk and RGB. Now, if you've ever done theater and worked with stage lights, I'm sure you're familiar with RGB, and if you've ever worked with printers and replaced cartridges, I'm sure you're familiar with Cmyk. Now, Cmyk stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key black. It's called that because the black is usually the first ink to be printed, and then that is used as a key to make sure that the rest of the colors are lined up correctly. The reason why it's cyan, yellow, and magenta is because because of the additive colors, right? So every pixel on your screen is made up of 3 different colors: red, green, and blue. And those being on or off is what gets you to white, which is why it's called additive, right? So unlike a canvas where you start with white and then you add colors to it, with a computer screen, you start at black and you add colors to get to white, which is why it's called additive, and the other one is called subtractive. So what this means in practice is that your green and blue mixed together is going to get you cyan, your blue and red is going to get you to magenta, green and red is going to get you to yellow. That's additive, and subtractive is the exact opposite. So yellow and cyan mixed is going to get you to green, magenta and yellow is going to get you to red, magenta, and cyan is going to get you to blue. Now, why we talk about blue, yellow, and red instead of cyan, magenta, and yellow is because of like traditional art reasons, basically. So like magenta and cyan were not really pigments used for the majority of art history. So all of our technical understanding is based on this historical context, which is why we talk about yellow, red, and blue. But from a super technical perspective of the digital age, your two different palettes are going to be cyan, yellow, and magenta, and red, blue, and green, and that's just based on your medium. I know this is all really like dense and complicated stuff, and I'm bringing up like art history and whatnot, but I'm just trying to answer a question that I know will come up the more you work with color. So if I go ahead and hit Control U, this is going to bring up, here I need to select a layer that I'm actually visible on. Actually, no, excuse me, Control B. This is going to bring up our color balance, and this is just something to demonstrate what this looks like in practice, right? So your cyan and red are opposites, your magenta and green are opposites, and your yellow and blue are opposites. So like messing with these levels is going to do funny things to our color palette. So that's the really too long didn't read version of why like every menu you're going to see like the color balance, and even like if you pull up your color picker menu here, is going to work in RGB and CMYK instead of red, blue, and yellow. So again, I know that's pretty complicated, but this is just based on the technical limitations and the like actual optics behind colors and why that's kind of based around everything. I don't want that to confuse you though, because when we're talking about color theory from like an artistic standpoint, it's still going to be yellow, red, and blue. If it helps you, you can think of yellow as yellow, red as magenta, and blue as cyan. It's not exactly one-to-one, but it's going to kind of help keep things straight. I hope this graphic does enough to explain this, maybe even more so than my ramblings. But hopefully that answers any questions you might have when you see like RGB and CMYK show up in these menus. In the next video, I will touch on what like hue, saturation, and balance is. But I just wanted to introduce you to the color wheels and then also the different modes of color mixing. Because color theory can get rather complex rather fast, and I don't want it to overwhelm you. So back to our main color wheel, this is all I want you to worry about. Your primary colors are yellow, blue, and red. Your secondary colors are green, orange, and purple, and then everything else in between is tertiary. So that is your color wheel.